Welcome to our next episode of our farming RPG game. So far what we've done is that our player can move around with the camera following him. So today we'll be starting on the farming system for our game. But before all that, there's a small change I want to make. Let's rename this scene from branch to farm. It's just a minor thing. Mostly because we're not just messing with animals, we'll be working on the farming system first. So anyway, for the farm we need some ground the player can walk on. So let's get some textures. What I do is I go to polyhaven.com and go to the texture section and look for the textures that I want. So we need 3 textures. One for the regular dirt, one for when you've tilled the soil, and one for when you water it. So after we're done here, right click and just extract files, and then we'll take our textures, go to assets, imported asset, create a farmland folder, and bring all of this in. Now let's create a 3D object to preview our materials. We create a new material by dragging the albedo texture onto the cube. See, there's a new material here. So let's configure it. So we bring the normal map here, mark it as a normal map. This one, this disp, this aerial ground rock disp will go to the occlude, the height map. There's no version. Okay, got it set up for this material. Let's rename it. Call it dirt. Move our brown. Zero. Rename it. So this is the textures when we've watered it. It's going to look like that. Adjust the height map accordingly a little bit. And now we have all 3 materials ready. So we have the dirt, tilled, and watered. So let's call this, create a new prefab. Let's reset its transform. Drag it to the prefabs folder. And now let's create our land script. So we need a script to handle the changes to these materials. Let's create a C# script. And so since we're using the 3 materials, let's declare our 3 materials. Soil map. So these are the 3 materials we'll be using. Likewise, we'll make an enum to reflect the 3 states that our land will have in its farming system. So that's the soil, farmland, and water. So dirt will be our soil, tilled land will be our farmland, and watered would be our watered land. Let's drag this new script over. Script called land, and assign these materials. So dirt goes here, farmland, tilled land goes to farmland, watered land goes to water. So if you were to test it, nothing's gonna happen. We also need a land status. We don't need the update. So let's make a function to handle the land status. Let's call this void public void switch land status. It will take in an enum, call it status to switch. We'll call it status to switch. Our current land status, which is this, is going to be so this function switches the land status variable to the status we want to switch to, and then we also reflect the changes on our cube. So to do this, we'll use a switch. Switch accounts for each of the possible cases. So the case land status is soil. Okay, so now we have a switch to account for every possible land status. So how do we actually change the material? So first we'll need a renderer. So we'll declare a renderer. So this renderer is going to be the renderer component on our land prefab. It's going to access this and change the material. So we're going to access the component. So now that we've accessed this component, we can change the material accordingly. Let's declare a new variable, call it material. Material to switch. By default, it's going to be land status soil. That's where we start with, right? It's the soil. It's the default material that we're using. So if it's a soil, it's going to switch to the soil material. It's the farm material. It's the farm material. The water material, we use water. So after this switch decides what material to switch to, we get the renderer to apply the changes. Back. So now it's going to switch accordingly. So by default, our land status is going to be the soil. Well, nothing's happened because we haven't coded any way for the player to interact with this land. So let's set it up. Let's go on to the interaction system. So on the player game object, let's make a new script, a new game object within the player. It's just going to be slightly in front of him. So this thing is going to control the player's range. Call it the interactor. Let's create a new script to handle all the player interactions. Player interaction. Drag it on here and edit. So obviously we need our player to access a player controller class, because this is going to work in line with this. So to access it, just player controller equals. We can't use get component because it's because the game object this is attached to is a child of the player game object. So we need to access the parent game object like this. Now how do we interact with things? First we'll draw a raycast to directly below this to detect what the player is, what's in front of the player. So to do this, in our update function, raycast hit. This will be whatever the raycast hits. And our physics. If physics dot raycast transform dot position. So it start with our player's position, and we want the ray to go directly downwards like this. So ray dot down. Max distance should be about 1. So before we declare the distance, let's hit. So this will be our hit info, will be assigned to this. So whatever the array hits, we hit this variable. And we'll create a function that handles this. So let's do hit, raycast hit. So for now, let's debug .log. Let's hit. Let's see if it works. So we'll try the game now. When I walk over this, it says raycast hit. Yep, it's working. But we shouldn't just debug this raycast hit. So let's, because if we were to add something, like any random quad as well, like let's say a big piece of land, that the player can walk on, it will also output the same message. So we need the player to be able to distinguish whether it's standing on land or if it's standing on just anything that isn't interactable. So let's set a collider out there. Get the hit collider. So you can tell this is a mesh, this is a box, but it isn't enough because we wanted to identify this as land. So let's create a new tag, call it land, and assign this to our land prefab. And now let's make an if statement. So if the other dot tag is going to be land, or yep, it works. Now let's give it a bit more feedback. Let's create a new object. Reduce the scale a little bit. Set it to inactive. Or this select. So if the player is going to be standing on land, it will set this to be active. Alright. Let's clone a little bit. Okay. So when the player selects the land, function for that, trying to get a way to access this. Select. This is the selection game object that will be enabled when the player is selecting the land. Let's call this toggle instead. Toggle it. There. So now if the player is selecting this game object will be set active, and if it's not, it's going to be set to false. Now over here, we'll get, so now if the player is standing over the land, let's get its land component. Other dot component. So now that we have our land game object, our land component, we can land.select. So now when we get on here, we just set this to select. And when our player walks over it, it's set to true. Now we just need to find a way to deselect it. Oh, we want when the player is selecting something, when the player walks over here, we want this interaction system to keep track of what it's selecting. So in this way, then the interactable is hit. Let's create a separate function to handle the selecting lands. So this is to handle this process. It's going to select the land component. So let's move this here. Select land. So instead, we don't want to just set this to true. We need to check first. We have to set the selected land. Right? But if we were already selecting some land before this, selected land is not going to be null. Because by default, selected land is null. But when the player had already selected another land before that, it's not going to be null. So we need to if it was priorly selected, we just set it to false. Now let's try this. Yep, much better now. But you see, when the player walks off it, it remains selected. So now we need to figure out a way to handle the selection when the player walks off the land completely. So let's go back to uninteractable hit. This. Okay, so the code logic is that if the player is standing on land, it's just going to do this and nothing else happens. But if this doesn't get triggered, we want to so if it's null, Set it to false, and select it then. Reset to null. Oh, it works better now, but we have one problem. It gets jittery. Why? Because when the player is standing over this, oh, we just have to remove the collider for this. Yep, much better now. So to improve our selection UI, let's open a image editor, create a new file. It can be Photoshop or any free image edit or any image editing software that supports transparency, really. So I use Paint.net. Then expand it. So it's going to be a transparent little box. Oops. This. So there's a transparent box like that with transparency underneath. We'll save as. So this will be our select texture. So let's import it over. Select texture. We'll create a UI folder for this. That. Bring it over. Whoops. This is our select. Bring it over like that. And now we have a material. But we want the middle to be transparent. So we'll change this to transparent. And our color can be red. That. There. So now when it's selecting something, it's going to look red. Looks much better. Let's move this down a little bit. You can find better textures for this, but this is the quickest fix that I prefer. Well, if we don't want to keep deactivating the select game object, let's set the select to be off at the start. So this way you can just leave it on just to preview. Okay. More or less works. So now we need to make the player interact with this. So if the land is being selected, option action. This is on our land script. Interact. So for now, it is debug.log. So now let's go to the player controller script. We need a whole interaction system. Call this interact. So if our player clicks the mouse button, so what's our mouse button? We can get our mouse button from Edit, Project Settings, Input Manager, Fire 1. So this is the button key. So the player presses the Fire 1 button to interact. So how do we interact? Player interact. So since this is in the child object of this game object, so we get the component in children. Press this. We also need an interaction function, yeah? And so I'm just linking the player controller. So this handles our input. So when I press the input, it's going to send an interaction here, our interaction system. So if our interaction system, so when it's triggered, when the player presses the interact key, or rather the tool button, because this is tools, because we will need another interaction system when the player picks up other items. We'll do this in a later part, but for now we'll just do tool interactions. So this is triggered when the player presses the tool button, it's going to interact. So we first need to check if the player is on any farmable land. Oh, if it's selecting any land, it's going to do this. Else, it's going to debug.log, tell me that it's not on any. Right. Let's see how it works out. So when our player is not standing on any land, it's going to say not on any land when I click my mouse. So now if I were to stand here, Click my mouse, it's going to say interact. It's coming from here. Let's do something more interesting. So instead of interacting, when I click, we want to switch the land to something. So let's pretend our player is holding it. So now, when our player stands over here and clicks, it changes its all to farmland. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be doing more in this part, in the following parts. So that's it. See you next time.